taken from a raven scroll sent north shortly after the battle. 2. Wyman Manderley, Lord of White Harbor, Royalist Army main body transporting gold and food pillaged from the Highgarden and the Reach, was attacked and destroyed en route between Tumbleton and King's Landing by Dothraki horde of immense size and a single dragon. Randall and Dickon Tarley executed. Troops dead or captured. Rumored death of the Kingslayer and Sir Bronn of the Blackwater, but were later seen entering King's Landing through the Mudgate. All food present burned. Will keep advised. Your sworn man, Hegerherger. Of the 4 major engagements of the War of the Two Queens, the Loot Train battle arguably had the largest lingering effects. So let's take a look at what occurred before, during, and after this particular battle. The first conflict in the War of the Two Queens is the naval battle that I will nickname the Battle of the Krakens, because it was between the 2 parts of House Greyjoy. This was the first defeat for Daenerys Stormborn. It led to the death or capture of the leadership of Dorne. This had the effect of taking all Dornish forces out of the fight. In addition to leaving them leaderless and without orders to move in on King's Landing, it also led to a succession crisis. The Sand Snakes had killed Prince Doran, and there was only one offspring of Doran listed in the show, which would be Trystane. And, well, we know what happened to him. With the death of House Martell and House Sands, the leadership of Dorne will probably end up in the hands of House Ironwood if the political dynamics from the books carry over to the show. The positive side of the Battle of the Krakens is the death of the Sand Snakes and the final euthanization of the Dorne plot, which has just been sickly and sad. The Battle of Casterly Rock, as we all know, was an assault of the Unsullied on the ancestral seat of House Lannister. Now, while the Unsullied have no experience in the show of assaulting fortifications, we do see it in the Battle of Meereen in the books. And like in the Battle of Meereen, the Unsullied are supported by a small force who go through the sewers, or in this case, the Hodor. This victory at Casterly Rock turns out to be a very Pyrrhic one because, of course, the bulk of the Lannister forces were attacking Highgarden. Okay, I'm not going to linger on the fall of Highgarden other than to point out 2 things about it that struck me. Oddly enough, the Reach is the most fertile area of Westeros. It has a large population because of the vast expanse of fertile farmable land. The Tyrells would have excellent section of population in which to draw the martially focused individuals. And classically, the Reach is the center of chivalry in Westeros, and would have large forces. All the lords would have large forces because of the rich and fertile land. And yet, Highgarden went meh and rolled over. So I understand the reasons for trying to remove the players from the board for the purposes of the show and simplifying things, but it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. The second point is the orders to strip the Reach of food. The Reach is a large area. Now, I could understand them stripping the food from the Tyrell lands and all the lands within, say, 50 miles of the Rose Road going northeast into King's Landing. But to actually strip the Reach of food would take months and a heck of a lot more wagons than what they brought with them. So I will I'll give it to them because it is a general order and a plot item, but it really doesn't make sense that they could strip the Reach in 2 weeks or even 3 weeks or heck even in months. The Dothraki are a nomadic people from the central plains of Essos, forever wandering and having only one permanent settlement, Vas Dothrak. They epitomize many nomadic cultures found in the real world, from the plains of Central Asia to the Plains Indians of North America. The Dothraki are a highly aggressive and ultra-violent culture. Fatal disputes between Dothraki men are common, and even their weddings turn into violent affairs. According to Ilio Mopatis, that a Dothraki wedding with less than 3 fatalities is considered a dull affair. They respect only strength and the ability to ride. They are a raiding and reaving culture, taking slaves in their raids and selling them to the slave masters of Slavers Bay and taking tribute from the city-states in western Essos. Since every Dothrakan is pretty much born riding a horse, horsemanship is greatly prized, and there are profoundly scornful names for those who can only walk. And because of their religious beliefs and their lifestyle reaving, they have no fear of death whatsoever. The Lannisters, on the other hand, represent the quintessential feudal system. The system that we see in Westeros is not based on any particular country of Europe during that period, but just epitomizes in general the feudal system, with peasants working the land and producing the food to supply to their lords and to the church that controls the spiritual half of life. When at war, Westerosi peasants follow their hereditary lord into battle and are augmented with professionals that are groomed from the largest and most aggressive peoples in the Lord's land. The faith of the Seven practiced in Westeros matches pretty well with European Catholicism, and so the Westerosi, whether they be professional soldiers, whether they're peasants or lords, have a rather typical apprehension and fear of death. In Westeros, when it comes to horsemanship, there isn't a whole lot of horse riders out there. Horses are only really used by people of wealth, aristocrats, and professional soldiers like mounted men-at-arms or knights. As was mentioned in the section on culture, the Dothraki follow strength. And as I said there, if you don't have strength, a Dothraki is not going to follow you. Now, the Dothraki leadership are in a interesting position. Classically, there are many calls to take up leadership. Well, we don't have that. Dany has managed to successfully unite the entire Dothraki people. This is pretty much unprecedented in their culture. However, seizing power from the Khals has caused some issues. A parallel that I would draw would be Stalin in Soviet Russia. After he took power, he purged all of the upper officers. And if you take a look at the figures, you really did not have a chance as an officer to survive in those purges until you got down to the rank of, I believe it was major. If you were a colonel, if you were a general, if you were a field marshal, you were either killed or sent off to the gulags. You were purged from the ranks. This was the biggest factor that led to the defeat against Finland in the 30s, because the officers who knew what they were doing were purged out of the ranks and were replaced by lower ranking individuals who had less skill and had no experience with maneuvers and operations on that level. So the Soviets had their butts handed to them. So Danny has taken the most proven and experienced calls and removed them from the equation. They're gone, leaving no leaders. And normally the blood riders of a call would be seen as, I guess you could call them officers, but she made them all officers. She made them all her own personal blood riders. So that means there is nobody on the Dothraki side who can take charge and give orders except Daenerys herself. There is the additional difficulty of that Daenerys, as the leadership, is present, but she's not on the field. She is removed from the field. She is in the air. She is on Drogon. She's flying about. She has no real control over large numbers of people while she's on the dragon. She cannot practically call orders, change direction, have them react to anything else other than what's in front of them. Now, Aegon and his sisters were also in the air during the original Field of Fire battle, but they also had subordinate lords who could lead troops and who could take advantages of the little occurrences that happen in battle. Dany cannot. And even if Daenerys was there on the field, actually on the ground and able to give orders, what would that actually do? She's not exactly the most experienced of combat leaders. Yes, she took Slaver's Bay, but she had Jorah Mormont, Barristan Selmy, Daario Naharis, and Grey Worm advising her and actually leading the troops. She didn't really do any of that. In the book, during the Battle of Yunkai, and during the first siege of Meereen, she was in her tent. She barely even looked at the action. Her generals did that. She doesn't have any generals on this battlefield. It's just her. So, not exactly the most ideal of situations. And to top it all off, Daenerys is not exactly the most experienced of dragon riders. The only times we see her riding a dragon is when she escapes the fighting pit in Meereen, when she reclaims Drogon, when she's on her way back to Meereen, and when she flies Drogon down from the pyramid to torch a few ships. Other than that, we do not see her ride a dragon at all. No pleasure trips, pleasure rides around Dragonstone. She's sitting in the castle. Of the three conquerors, the most experienced was not dragon rider, was not Aegon, was not Visenya. It was Rhaenys. She loved to fly. She had more flight time, to use a modern term, than her brother and sister combined. Okay, let's take a look at the Lannister leadership now. With the exception of Bronn, and Bronn is the exception to almost every case, the Lannisters are following birthright nobles. The birthright system can have a very fluid transfer of power, but just because dad or grandpa or great grandpa was a great general, charismatic leader, an intelligent tactician, a fearsome warrior, is in no way guarantee that the son will be any of those things. A wonderful parallel on that would be Edward II, compared to his father and compared to his son. The Lannister leadership, actually, I would consider, has a nice advantage because, well, the leaders have actually fought wars recently. Jaime had been dealt with the siege up at River Run. Randall Tarley had been part of the forces that ended up at the Blackwater. The War of the Five Kings had been raged for 2-3 years. And so they're experienced with combat, marshaling forces, leading men, directing men. They know what they're doing, and they've been doing this recently. Oh, heck, they just came from the Battle of Highgarden. Another thing I noticed about the Lannister leadership is that they are supremely confident. Actually, they're overconfident. Granted, yes, they are traveling through friendly territory, and yes, they have the biggest army in the area, or so they think. No real mention of outriders, no real view of outriders. Almost no horsemen, which strikes me as being profoundly strange, and I'll get to that a little later on. But you would think that Jaime would have learned and had outriders. Yes, I know bandits are not going to be bothering forces of men that large, but in the books, when Jaime left King's Landing to head towards River Run, he said, yes, I know we're in friendly territory, but put out outriders. I am not going to fall victimhood to that again. And evidently he didn't quite learn. And you can see it in their eyes when they hear the roll of the thunder of the Dothraki that they may have been prepared on one level, but they were definitely not ready for any kind of major confrontation. Now let's take a look at what these two armies are wearing and what they're fighting with. With just a cursory look through the various scenes and where you see Dothraki riders, they don't use armor. What armor they have is very light patchwork. You might have the occasional rider with a pauldron or maybe a van brace, but they're not going to have much in the way of solid body protection. Now, while using little or no armor really helps the Dothraki in their mobility, if they are pinned down, it does not give them enough significant protection in order to be able to sustain a fight that they cannot immediately get out of. Now, this armor that you see Rakharo wearing in this photo appears. It looks. I'm looking at it. It looks like it's made out of rope fibers, so probably hemp. Now, for a slicing, grazing shot to the body, that would probably help. But it doesn't look like it's reinforced with anything more substantial, and something like that, as I said, would be good for a light slice, but it's not going to stop any kind of arrow. It's not going to stop a spear. It's not going to stop anything that's thrusting. A thrust will be able to go through that and into the person wearing it. even here in Westeros, they don't appear to be wearing any form of body armor. As you can see in the picture here, uh, they do have furs, but they don't appear to have anything over those furs in terms of body protection. Now, when it comes to weapons, no Dothraki rider is going to be found without his Eric. They can also be called sickle swords, which were used by the ancient Egyptians and during the invasion of Canaan by the Hebrews. There can also be called kopeshes in certain modern role-playing systems. With its long curved blade, the Eric is perfect for a culture of horse-mounted riders. The curved blade um, lends itself greatly to slice attacks, where the curve itself actually helps facilitate the cut into the target. They're obviously not particularly good at stabbing. This is not what they're meant for, but they do have a weakness. If you have a dense body protection, whether that be in the form of any form of metallic or even leather plate, or even just a simple cloth gambeson, which I'll show an example of later, which is just literally a quilted jacket that will help resist the attacks of the Eric. Erics are best used against the type of opponents that the Dothraki face, especially a good example of this would be the Lazarene. They don't wear body armor. They're not warriors. They are wearing light clothing or naked flesh, and in those instances, an Eric will cut open the human body beautifully. There's a nice conversation between Rakero and Jorah Mormont in the third episode, Lord Snow, specifically about um, an Eric versus plate mail. And later on in the season, as you may remember from this particular scene, exactly what happens when an Eric is used against plate armor. It tends to bounce. Being horsemen, of course, the Dothraki are also armed with bows. I'm not sure of very many horse warriors beyond the mounted knights of medieval Europe that didn't use bows. They also have these pole arms. I'm not exactly sure what these are. Are these supposed to be glaives? Um, like the one I have circled here. I'm not exactly sure what it was used as a base, but you can see in this particular picture to the right-hand side of, or to the to Tyrion's left, and behind him, you can see a Dothrakan carrying a polearm. I'm looking at that, and that almost looks vaguely looks like something from China, but I don't know enough to be able to firmly name that weapon. I see the occasional spear throughout the course of the battle in the hands of a Dothraki rider, but it's not a typical weapon, so they are not using it couched like a medieval lance in mass. I do see I see some of the Dothraki riders that are carrying spears. They do have them under their arms, but a it does not appear to be a standard thing. Now we come to the Lannisters and their equipment. And like with the Dothraki, we'll start with the armor. This has been kind of a pet peeve that of mine for a long time, and there's a lot of things that I look at during this sequence, and it gives me twitches. So let's start off with the hero characters, specifically the um, three that we see in this photo, being Randall Tarley, Jaime Lannister, and Bronn. Bronn is essentially wearing the equivalent of high-end street clothes, so I'm not even going to go there. But both Randall and Jaime are both wearing very rather almost disturbingly incomplete suits of armor. Um, what they have, all three men are wearing leather doublets for all intents and purposes. A little bit of padding, but not a whole lot. The protective measure of the leather itself, but this is going to be soft leather, so there's no hardening and will not give you any more protection from a slice or a stab than your average biker leather jacket. Warriors of their wealth and their experience would not consider this complete armor in any way, shape, or form. Yes, the plates themselves are large, makes cuts and stabs largely pointless. The blunt force trauma actually is what will then go through the plates, and that can only be countered by padding. Plates also do not protect where they are not. So, taking a look at their armor here, there are large gaps around the shoulders, under the arms, the forearms. All of those are vulnerable to a quick stab. And those are very easy targets to aim a stab at. And take a look at this Lannister soldier from just before the Battle of Blackwater. Yeah, I know it's dark, it's in the tavern, but there is nothing protecting his arm. This is where you shoot for. You don't aim at the armor. Your weapon is simply going to bounce. You're going to work around it, and there is so much open there. And I'm looking at the what is underneath, and I don't see a single bit of even pretend quilting. What goes on underneath a suit of armor, whether this be a coat of mail, otherwise known today as chain mail, but it's actually called mail, is either a gambeson, which is cloth armor, 7 layers of linen quilted tightly together, or an arming jacket, like we can see here. Now, an arming jacket is just a jacket that is got layers of quilted linen and chainmail woven together, because, well, a chain mail is essentially steel cloth, together to provide that extra armor where the plates don't cover. Now, some people will say, yes, it's only costume, and yes, I do understand this, but it's not like Game of Thrones don't know this. Take a look here. Look at underneath Jorah's arm. That's chainmail. Okay, what about the Hound right here? Look at around his shoulders, around that breastplate that you can see, well, his coat of plates that you can see there. There's chainmail there. They do know this. Or take a look at these lords here in Tywin's tent. You can see that non-Lannister lords have proper protection, but the Lannister lords don't have good. They don't have it. Could somebody explain this to me? It doesn't make any sense. They have partial armor. You know, the lacquer and the gilding aside, which, yes, it makes it look pretty, but if it doesn't protect you, you're not going to wear it. It just weighs you down. Bronn is better off than Jaime, and is almost better off than Jaime and Randall. He's not being weighed down, and his whole fighting style is light, stay on his feet, and to not take blows. It's this is something I don't understand. But let us move on. Let's take a look at the grunt soldiers. Now, this particular frame is probably the best example that I can see of all the Lannister equipment put together. You have Now, oddly enough, I think they do a better job with the armor of the extras than they do of some of the heroes in this particular sequence. But that's just my opinion. As you can see here, the frontline infantry are wearing the full plate, and I'm using that in quotes here because I can guarantee, like the drinking Lannister doesn't have a Gambeson underneath it, but he's got a full helmet on. He's got a kite shield that goes all the way down to the ground, and he's got full plate on. Now, I did think it was very clever that they added the spikes. In the multiple battles that we have seen the Lannisters in, this is this is the first campaign where you see them with this kite shield design, which I think is a an interesting innovation. Whether somebody was expecting trouble or not, or if this was supposed to represent a new design of the Lannister fighting method, I'm not entirely sure. Now, the second rank is made of spearmen, and they appear to have steel breastplates, also called cuirasses. Most of the components of suits of armor are French-based words, and they also have helmets on, which is a absolute must in combat. Most blows are aimed at the head. And you can see behind them archers who have helmets on. Now, I am looking at to what they're wearing on their bodies. I don't see any quilting that could be considered a gambeson underneath that leather, and that leather is too soft. The ounceage of that leather is too light to provide any practical protection, especially with how soft it obviously is. Now, I also do realize this is TV. These are extras. There's hundreds of extras that they have to dress daily for weeks in order to be able to put on these scenes. I do understand this, but in terms of the realism, what those archers are wearing are just simply essentially a uniform. That is not body armor. Going through the Lannister weapons, um, it appears to be a kind of standard mix. Obviously, as you can see in this scene, they're broken down by lines, but it's a mix of bows, spears that appear to be probably around 7.5 to 8 feet long. So for battlefield spears, kind of on the short side, and bows. And of course, they also have the ballista, the javelin thrower, ballista, scorpion. It's all the same. It's different names for the same piece of equipment, but for the big honkin' bolt thrower, they have that in with the hidden amongst the rest of the food wagons. Now let's take a look at where the battle happens. Now, there are three types of warfare in a medieval setting. The most common was siege warfare, where you basically bottle somebody up inside a settlement, inside of a fortress, and you sit there to starve them out. Sometimes you may have to go over the top of the wall, depending on the situation, but usually it was there. You sat there, you kept the supplies from coming in, and you simply waited for them to starve or to dehydrate. Another form of combat, of course, is ambush. That would be what you would expect from outlaws, um, wildlings in this particular case, or other raiding or people who do raids, which of course would include the wildlings, the Ironborn, and the Dothraki. And the third kind of combat is open field, because the big set piece battles that you saw in medieval times, like Agincourt, Crécy, Pointers, and innumerable others, the Battle of Hastings, these are all field battles. And they ain't kidding when they mean open field. Do you see any trees here? I don't. There is nothing here. Completely open field. The Dothraki must feel right at home. When it comes to numbers, it's a little difficult to make any real accurate estimates. Now, assuming that Danny brought over the entire Dothraki peoples, which would come out to be 100,000 Dothraki riders. This makes absolutely no sense in the context of what we see in the show. So I'm going to step back from that and try to take a crack at the numbers that seem to be present at the battle. Now, another time that I have seen vast human numbers using limited numbers of extras would be the 1963 movie, Michael Caine movie called Zulu, about the Battle of Rorke's Drift. And at the Battle of Rorke's Drift, it was 4,000 Zulus attacked 150 British soldiers. And the techniques and feel of that opening shot are kind of similar to what we see the vast, incredible horde of Dothraki pouring over that over the horizon that we see in the loot train. So I'm going to put my guess at about 4,000. Actually, 4,000 plus. There could be more, but I think 4,000 is a solid guess. Now, granted, it's shot in such a way you don't see the entire horde at once. That's to cut down on the extras that they need and the crowd replication that's needed by the CGI. So it's shot in such a way that we don't see the whole mass. But I think it would be reasonable to say that there's probably about 4,000 Dothraki on the field. When it comes to the Lannisters, it is also a little bit difficult to be making guesses in terms of the Lannister army is protecting what is essentially a supply train, and they're spread out. Now I'm looking at these I'm looking what I'm seeing here, but I am no expert on it. I have not brought out a caliper to start trying to measure number of people per inch on the screen and then extrapolating outwards. I haven't done anything like that. But if somebody told me that there were somewhere between I would 1,500 men there present, I'd probably put that too much. If somebody told me there was 1,000 men there, I'd believe it, because there are only 3 lines, and that is very thin. So I'm gonna place my guess at somewhere between probably 1,000 and 1,500 men on the Lannister army, which, needless to say, doesn't bode well for the Lannister forces. Now, the Lannisters, they didn't have a whole lot of time. They had maybe less than, in reality, considering the distance, they had less than probably about They had less than. I would say they had less than 5 minutes in order to get themselves ready, which they did in good order. They set up their lines extremely quickly. They filled in, well, such as the lines were. They filled them in very quickly, and they were ready. You know, essentially in medieval combat standards, they were ready in a blink of an eye. One of the problems that they did not do is that they did not take advantage of certain advantages in the microterrain. As you can see here, there is a ridge in front of this section of troops. So the archers wouldn't be able to shoot at the Dothraki coming up behind it and get accurate shots in that last 100 yards, where even knightly plate like Sir Hugh is going to be able to stop. So any shot, any arrows loosed at less than 100 yards are going to are going to put, not necessarily kill because it depends on where you hit, but will certainly critically injure anybody they hit at less than 100 feet. You can't do that if there's earth in the way. Now, I will give them leeway here, because looking at the number of people that they don't have enough people to form. They don't have enough people to form a proper line and to protect anything. So they had to to protect the smallest amount of space possible. They had to protect the minimum amount of space and yet still be able to cover everything, giving up advantages of micro terrain. However, the Lannister army has a great advantage in having a partial advantage of having the river at their back, so they cannot be encircled. The problem is that they've got nowhere to go. They cannot retreat across the river because that river is too deep for men in armor to attempt to cross under combat pressure. Now let's take a look at the tactics used by both of the different armies, and as always, we're going to start with the Dothraki. The tactics in this particular case don't appear to be all that sophisticated. It's charge. Point the riders at the enemy, and they charge forward. The Dothraki also fight like the wildlings. They don't fight in formation. Each man is fighting for his own particular glory. He's having his own fight. They're not fighting as one solid block, which is fine when you're fighting against the Lazarene, but it's not so great against tight, packed formations. If a group is able to form a coherent line, it will be able to repel a mass charge. We could see this again and again in examples with the Gauls against the Romans. The Romans fought in formations. They fought as a solid block, and the Gauls and the Celts they didn't have this mindset, and the Romans were able to dominate them again and again and again. It's slightly different with cavalry, yes, but it is still an issue. In the Century of Blood, when the Dothraki originally came out of the sea and were fighting the tall men, there were times mentioned in the in the World of Ice and Fire that the Dothraki could do large enveloping movements with different flanks of the Dothraki fighting as large general units. Well, they could do this because, one call took the east flank, another call took the west flank, the south, and another call had the south flank, and they had command and control, which, because of Dany's purge, she doesn't have. So that it and the ability that they once had with large unit control like that, the Dothraki at the battle at Field of Fire 2.0 they don't have. It's just point at the enemy in charge. Now the Field of Fire 2.0 shows us for the first time what the Dothraki are really like in a large pitch battle, and they show off their horsemanship with a wonderfully dazzling piece of mounted archery by standing up on their saddles. Now that works with the Dothraki culture of bravado and savagery and just insane bravery, because yes, it does make them a, a much bigger target, but it does, oddly enough, and believe it or not, would actually convey a advantage because they can now shoot over the heads of the frontline shieldmen much easier. They have a much better angle in order to be able to get the shots over the shields and into the ranks behind them. They also have the numbers in order to be able to absorb any and all arrows that are shot at them by the Lannisters. Now on the other side, of course, the Lannister army is set up defensively. For them, this is a defensive fight. Now, Westerosi armies are used to fighting in formation, but I cannot begin to tell you how much it fails here. And the ways they fail boil down to two specific aspects. They don't have enough ranks. There are not enough ranks to stop a wedge of infantry, let alone horse riders. Those Dothraki, they're on horses that are about 1,000 pounds, and they're moving somewhere between I believe it's between 15 and 25 miles an hour, depending. And the shields do not overlap, and there's only one rank of spearmen behind them. I have seen documentaries and can conceivably point you in a documentary where a rider just simply blows through a shield wall that actually has shields that can overlap. Right now, if a Dothraki rider hits one of those shields in the right way, it's going to at best, will break the man's arm. At worst, will rip his arm off because of the power pivoting on that spike stuck into the ground. It's just gonna wreck the guys in front, and they'll just be able to completely blow through the formation that the Lannisters have. The other place where the unit cohesion of the Lannisters just completely fail is once the units break, they rout. One of the things I learned when I was doing SCA fighting is that as soon as the line breaks, you reform. That's the first thing you do, is you jam your shoulder into the guy next to you and you lock shields. That is the very first thing you do once lines are broken. And that does not happen here. You see the Lannisters running singly hither and thither everywhere, just getting run down and slaughtered. There was something else that I noticed while putting this under further review is you have the piece of equipment of the ballista semi-ready to go, ready to be uncovered, unfurled, and shot at a dragon. Awesome. Where's the crew? Why is that not crew never farther than 50 feet away from the ballista? The whole point is to have an operational ballista. Are you expecting the generals to go and man the thing? They have better things to do, like directing their men, keeping them from panicking. Where's the guys that are supposed to fire the thing? This was a serious WTF moment for me when I realized this. Yeah, great, Bronn can fire it. And the fact that he was taught how to use it, that was awesome. But how many yards was he from it when the battle started? He was what, a couple hundred yards, judging by the that long running shot. Why were the generals that far away from the ballista? It makes no sense. That's something you would want to be by as a general, so you could direct fire. You know, it's something that makes absolutely no sense and was a massive fail on the Lannister side in the way that they ran their forces. When the Dothraki finally hit the Lannister lines, it should have been like this right here, what you're seeing. Horse riders smashing through the line, not just in one section, not just through the fire, not just up the train of fire left by Drogon's first breath. This should have happened up and down the actual battlefield. Not just one section, the entire battlefield. The entire line should have shattered right here. But as we can see, they held together for about not very long, maybe 5 minutes, if that, and then they collapsed. So the great horde of the Dothraki smash into come in, they smash into the Lannister lines and inexplicably stop. Somehow they were able to kill the momentum of all of the Dothraki riders. Now, this is where realism, historical combat, and cinema separate. In reality, what would happen is the Dothraki would just smash through the Lannister lines. Those 3 layers of tinfoil wouldn't stop the Dothraki with the numbers that they had and just the sheer raw momentum that they had. Those 3 lines would not have been able to stop the Lannisters. But this is cinema, so tension must be raised, and the Lannisters managed to hold them off. The Lannister forces managed to hold them off for about 5-10 minutes, if that, before everything completely collapses. Long enough for Jaime to have the archers take some long shots at Drogon in a blind hope that they might be able to take it down. Long enough to allow Bronn to get to the ballista to take multiple shots at Drogon in trying to take him down, actually succeeding in giving him a flesh wound and pissing off a dragon to no end. But by that point, the battle, such as it was really over. To be fair to the Lannister forces, they were in a nasty, nasty catch-22 because in order to be able to defend themselves against the Dothraki, they had to be in tight, coherent units. It's the only way to defend against large numbers is to be in a condensed unit. A good cinematic example of this is the Colosseum scene from Gladiator. The guys that stuck together lived. The guys that were single in the Colosseum, they died. That's how you deal with horses, with mounted horses. That's how you deal with mounted men, and how you deal with large numbers. You have to be in a solid condensed unit. However, being in a solid condensed unit makes you perfect target practice for Dragonfire. And Daenerys could have just gone back and forth, up and down that, just roasting the entire line, and there would have been nothing to stop her. So the only way to survive that is to be dispersed. Well, if you do that, you're then just simply blades of grass before the scythes of the Dothraki riders, and you get cut to pieces. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, captured troops were brought before Daenerys and were given the opportunity to either join her or die. A rather contradictory statement when you include the fact that she said that I am not here to murder you. You will join me or be murdered. Sounds like she has a bit of a PR problem that she needs to sort out. Randall and Dickon Tarly were executed for refusing her offer to join her. This doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in the greater context, considering Randall Tarly was an ardent Targaryen supporter during Robert's Rebellion. Now, the only reason why I think they did this was to thin out the character roster so they could focus on fewer and fewer characters, simplifying the story. The Field of Fire 2.0 was decisive in the fact that it really changed everything. Not only did it destroy a good portion of the Southern Royal Army, it would also lead to the permanent confinement of any royal army into cities and castles for protection. They would not be able to face the Dothraki again in the open field. Even if other armies are brought in from the Westerlands or the Riverlands, they would be relentlessly harried by the Dothraki before they could get anywhere near their objectives. And there is no other military strength left in the Reach, the Kingslands, or the Stormlands. And because of that lack of a military umbrella, if the Dothraki were left to their own devices, they could lay waste to any region in Westeros, with the possible exception of the Vale. Say what you like about the rest of the season, I thought the Loot Train battle was absolutely and totally fantastic. It was pure spectacle, pure fantasy spectacle. It wowed us. It pulled on our tension strings. It was fantastic. It had everything I could have asked for. I personally did not have really any sympathy for the Lannister soldiers. They kind of made their own bed in those terms between the Acts of Tywin and the unhanged criminals that were the men of Sir Gregor Clegane. I hope you enjoyed this. This is what I saw during the Loot Train battle. I have future plans to do this not only for the Battle of the Bastards, but also for the Battle of Blackwater as well. Fortunately for me, those aren't going to be as long because there's no difference between the culture and equipment of the involved fighters, so that will make things so much easier for me. I also have plans to do a video on the Curse of Harrenhal, so look forward for that. I can't really say when that's going to be, but it is in the plans and in the pipes. So, this has been Hegerherger. If you enjoyed the video, give a like, and I'll see you in the next one.